Hi everyone, thanks for joining today. I'm Stephen Basil, one of our developer advocates here on Google Drive, and today I'm going to take a look at a fairly new Drive app that we found in the Chrome Web Store called Ultradox. This is an app from Florisoft. Actually familiar with them. They've actually been doing a lot of apps for Google Apps users over the past few years. Worked with them in the past. There's some really great tools in the Google Apps Marketplace for domain administrators and things around shared contacts. And I was really happy to find that they did this new application called Ultradox, which adds some, I think, much needed features for Google Apps users, particularly people who use Google Drive and want to get things like mail merge and templating, and batch processing of for doc generation using Google Docs and Google Drive. I want to take a just quick look at their Chrome Web Store entry. For those who have been looking for a solution for doing templating and mail merge in Google Docs, you can take a look at this. You can find them in the Google Drive collection. And it's a pretty cool app. If you want, you can go and look at the video. They have a really great tutorial showing off all the features. And if you go take a look at their application, they have a whole bunch of really cool templates to help you get started. Everything from interview letter feedbacks to badges. Some really interesting things with dynamic maps, being able to create dynamic documents based off of, say, for example, contact's email address or actually address or information that you have in a spreadsheet. Lots of cool stuff. And to be honest, I haven't actually gone through and tried all of these yet. There's a lot of power here that is a bit of a learning curve. But I want to show off kind of the basic features and talk a little bit about some of the integration things they did from a technical perspective. Some good, some interesting, but not supported. So let's just actually jump into that. I created here earlier a new Ultradoc. You can actually go and create these from Google Drive under the Create menu. So you can go here and say Create New Ultradoc. And this will just give us a blank project to work with. And here it's just Untitled. We can rename this. We'll just make this one another GDL demo. And of course, the next thing we need to do is actually have a template for our document. We can use Google Docs. We can actually select an existing template or create a new one. And then we can merge that template with data either from Google Contacts, from a spreadsheet. We can actually even do both. We can select multiple contacts, multiple spreadsheets, and pull data from different ones in order to generate that document. So I'm going to start with a really simple example using contacts. And first I'm just going to bring up actually myself as a contact. And we can see here all the different variables that it found in contacts. These are things that we can then use in that template. And so it's really great to see that they're using the contacts integration in addition to Drive. And let's go create a new template. So one of the cool things they're doing here, which is both cool and slightly unnerving, is iframing the Google Docs editor. This is not something that is officially supported, but it does work. And in this case, I really like what they did in terms of using the iframing to display additional help and context for how to actually write templates. One of the things that would be very difficult for users if they just had our editor without the additional help, then I would be lost as a user trying to write a template. But here now I have this really handy reference. I can look through all the different template variables. In this case, because all I have is just a contact, those are the only ones that are available to me, in addition to some generic ones that are always available. So this is straight through to.name.full name. So really, really simple example. And we can even just preview this really quickly by clicking Generate Document. And here we can see, Dear Stephen Basil, hello. Not too exciting, but a really useful thing. just to demonstrate the kind of the simplicity and the power of this. So I want to actually go back to this project and bring in a spreadsheet. So let's just create a new spreadsheet. And let's just say this is task. Dismiss that, and we'll say clean house and 3 hours, and let's see, amount, I'll say $50. So really simple spreadsheet here. If I go back over to the Ultradox, is actually, as I edited it, it's actually been polling for changes to the document and detected that I added a few things. And you can actually see here, one of the challenges with polling for changes to documents is it actually didn't pick up all of the columns that I've added. So here I have task hours and amounts. Because I waited a few seconds before adding that third column, it hasn't yet detected it. But on its next polling interview, it should show up, and it should show this as a new variable that's available. We can go over to our template, and we should also start to see these appear here in our list of variables that are available. So again, one of these things we can do, let's say we'll do sheet 1 task, and I'm not entirely sure if this will work. No, so one of the things with Ultradox is they actually do have different styles of doing templating depending on the source of the data. So for things like contacts, it's actually really easy to reference the data. So basically you have a single object. You could just pull out the fields that you need for that. For sheets, it does treat the sheet as a single object itself, and it does aggregate the rows together. So you do have to, in order to do things like rows and either do formulas. You have to actually do the proper template variables for doing that. The good thing is they actually have really good help. Let's actually go over to that. Very good help on here for how to do all this with their product. So we can look at templates. They talk about how to do conditionals, how to do loops, how to format. We can do aggregates, all sorts of really cool things. And so when you actually start getting into some of their advanced features, you can start to see how you can use this to do things like if you had, for example, you're a contractor, you were doing a job for a customer, and you were keeping track of all the different work items for a particular job in a spreadsheet. You can now have a nice little template of a cover letter that you sent out to your users when you wanted to, or to your customers when you invoice them, and have it nicely formatted in a doc. And if you want to do really advanced formatting, they also support LibreOffice files in addition to Google Docs. So if the formatting controls in Google Docs isn't quite enough for your needs, you can go use LibreOffice, and you can even use LibreOffice Online with some of the applications that we have in the Chrome Web Store, such as Install Free Nexus. In which case you start to see that power of having this ecosystem of applications where I can start to do everything I need to do in the browser, in Chrome, on any device, whether or not it's using Google Docs as an editor or LibreOffice inside a browser as well. Really, really cool stuff when you start to combine all these apps together. A couple other things I wanted to show in here is they actually do have some other things you can do in terms of how these documents are generated. So one of them, obviously you can generate these. You can save them back to Google Drive in different formats. You can do a PDF, or you can have that converted back into a Google Doc format if you just wanted to share that out to somebody, specify the folder and so on. Of course, you can email these out to people, send multiple copies. But another really cool thing is Google Cloud Print. I don't have any printers configured for this particular account, but this is something that they support. When you do the OAuth grant for for that application, it will ask for permission to access your printers. Right now, all I have is the kind of the default save to Google Drive one. But if I had my printer at home or one of the printers in the office configured, I can have it just printed out directly from the application. And this is really useful when you actually start doing batches of documents. So you can, if you want to do a mail merge type functionality and select a bunch of contacts, you can do that and have them just kind of print out just automatically all from this web app without having to deal with your native printer dialog, or without even being anywhere physically close to having a printer. So it's a pretty cool app. And I just noticed here, earlier I was mentioning about the latency with polling for the changes. We can actually see here now that it did discover the additional templates in there. You could actually even see this too if I just start putting in a random template variable. We'll just say foo. We'll go back, and it should in probably a minute or so. This field here where it says ready to go is actually going to update and warn me that I have a variable in the document that isn't really bound to a value yet. It's not something coming from a contact. It's not coming from the spreadsheet. So it is something that I need to fill out. And it's really good for kind of those one-off things that you just need to do that final little bit of customization for, that you're not going to be pulling from one of these other data sources. So overall, I'm really just scratching the surface with this application, and I do actually plan on playing around with it a lot more. I think it's a very cool application, and something that a lot of Google Docs users have been asking for this type of functionality. And I think they did a pretty good job at making a pretty good user experience. There's a lot of complexity, and there is a learning curve because it is a new templating system. There's a lot of power you can do with spreadsheets and looping and dealing with multiple contacts, doing batch processing. So it does take a little bit of time to really get familiar with everything that you can do in there. But once you get into the advanced stuff with having customizable maps and dynamic image generation, really awesome features, and a very welcome addition to kind of the apps ecosystem that we have here. I know they've also made this application available in the Google Apps Marketplace for domain administrators to install for all their users as well. And I know that there, certainly some technical challenges that they had to encounter there in dealing with multiple marketplaces, different ways of doing authentication and authorization, depending on whether or not this is a domain-wide install versus an individual consumer coming along. Something that we may explore in future GDL sessions. But they did a pretty good job there. The biggest criticisms I have, and it's really not I really can't fault them too much for these, is the polling latency is noticeable, particularly as a new user for the application, where I want to do a lot of experimentation and going back and creating and updating a spreadsheet and the template and switching back and forth in order to explore those features. Having that latency of 30 seconds to a minute for it to detect changes to the template was a little bit bothersome, and that's unfortunately is not something they can easily work around with at this time. If they were to increase the polling frequency, they would start to run into quota limitations. So it's just a balancing act right now. Hopefully, we'll have a better solution in the future for this type of functionality. And then the other issue is the iframing of the editor. Again, this is not something that we particularly encourage or support. But it in this case they did so for good reason to overlay this help dialog or this little help pane. Again, that's hopefully something will improve in the future and give developers more options for integrating with our editors. But in the meantime, it's a pretty good use of an unsupported feature. But I would not recommend anyone do that unless it was absolutely necessary to do so. Other than that, a really good use of combining multiple Google services with contacts, spreadsheets, Google Cloud Print. And I do know this does run on App Engine. You can actually notice this the first time that you use the application. You will get some App Engine specific artifacts around authentication. It's one of those things where it's a trade-off for developers. App Engine does have some really nice features in terms of integration with Google accounts. The downside to using those features is you do pay a little bit of a penalty on the user experience because of the separation between the App Engine login screen and the OAuth grant. And so you end up with a two-step approval, which I'm not going to actually show here, but the first time that you use this application, you do actually have to do 2 steps to authorize the application fully. That could have been avoided by doing a pure OAuth 2 based system for both authenticating and authorizing the user and do it in one step, but they would have had to write a little bit more code in order to manage the users themselves rather than using App Engine's built-in user service. I'm actually really excited to play with this application. I actually have a lot of things in mind, just personally for how this could be useful. My family, we send out lots of stuff around the holidays, and I can see doing as our news around the holidays grows, and I want to start doing form letters. I probably will be using Ultradox. Other than that, really good job to the guys at Flurrysoft, and I think that's it for today. So try out Ultradox if you are looking for templating in Google Docs or mail merge functionality. It's a really cool product. And come back next week. And I don't know if we have a topic set, but we do have a few things in the pipeline, so hopefully some new features that we can announce next week. And if so, I think they will make for some very interesting sessions. Thanks, and see you all next time.